The Ascent of Money, A Financial History of the World, by Niall Ferguson. Picture this scene. You're standing in a cramped room somewhere in the mountains. In front of you is a king, a man his people worship as a living god. His name is Atahualpa, and he rules the vast Inca Empire. Right now, though, he's a prisoner, and he's making an offer to the heavily armed, bearded strangers holding him captive. He points to a line on the wall, way above his head. He promises to fill this entire room with gold, all the way up to that mark. Then he'll fill it twice more with silver. The year is 1532. The men who captured him are Spanish conquistadors, led by an illiterate fortune seeker named Francisco Pizarro. They've sailed across an ocean, armed with guns, steel, and an insatiable hunger for precious metals. To them, this offer sounds like a dream come true. Here's the thing, though. The Incas had no idea what money actually was. To them, gold was simply the sweat of the sun, and silver was the tears of the moon. Beautiful, sacred materials, sure, but not money. For Pizarro and his men, though, gold and silver were everything. They were portable power, the key to any door they wanted to open. But here's the twist that would reshape the next 500 years of history. A secret that Pizarro and his king back in Spain would learn the hard way. Money isn't metal. Having mountains of it doesn't automatically make you rich. In fact, it can destroy you. So what is money, really? What is this invisible force that builds empires and tears them down? That pays for artistic masterpieces and finances devastating wars? That can turn a nation of farmers into a superpower, and then bring the entire world to the edge of collapse in the blink of an eye? Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating books ever written on this subject, The Ascent of Money by historian Niall Ferguson. This isn't just a book about finance, it's a hidden history of the world, told through the story of money. Ferguson has sold millions of copies because he does something remarkable. He makes the complex world of finance feel like an adventure story, packed with gamblers, geniuses, and scoundrels who shaped our modern world. Here's my promise. By the end of our journey today, you'll never look at a dollar bill, a stock ticker, or even your own home the same way again. You'll understand the hidden forces that govern our world, from the Italian Renaissance to the 2008 financial crisis and beyond. You'll see that money is, at its core, a story about human belief. It's about trust. And understanding this story is absolutely essential if you want to navigate the world we live in. So let's begin our ascent. Our story begins in a world without money, a world some people dream about. But it wasn't paradise. In hunter-gatherer societies, there was no saving for tomorrow. You ate what you killed or gathered, and that was it. When two tribes met, they were more likely to fight over resources than trade. As Ferguson puts it, hunter-gatherers do not trade, they raid. Money, then, is humanity's first step away from that brutal existence. But early money didn't look like the coins we know today. Thousands of years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, people used simple clay tablets. A farmer might borrow some barley, and the lender would get a clay tablet, basically a promise that the barley would be repaid at harvest time. You can still see these tablets in museums today. What's fascinating is that they're essentially the very first financial contracts. They represent a fundamental human relationship, the one between lender and borrower. Look at a modern dollar bill. It says, "In God we trust." But the real trust isn't in a divine being. It's in the institution that issues the bill. The paper itself? Worthless. The value comes from shared belief, from a promise to pay. That clay tablet from 4,000 years ago and the electronic digits in your bank account today, built on exactly the same foundation. Money isn't metal. It's trust made tangible. The Spanish conquistadors never figured this out. They discovered a literal mountain of silver in Potosi, in what's now Bolivia. They called it the Rich Hill. They forced hundreds of thousands of indigenous people and African slaves to work in nightmarish conditions to extract it, creating a city larger than most in Europe at the time. They thought this mountain of silver would make Spain unbeatable. It didn't. It became a curse. The Spanish kings spent the silver on endless wars, flooding Europe with so much metal that its value crashed. This triggered massive inflation known as the thoughts price revolution. The price of simple bread skyrocketed, causing suffering across the continent. Spain, despite its silver, slowly declined. They'd missed the first great lesson of finance. Simply having more money doesn't make a society richer. If money supply grows faster than the goods and services it can buy, prices just go up. The real revolution in money wasn't digging it from the ground. It was creating it from nothing, and that required inventing banks. The banking story doesn't start in a pristine boardroom. It starts with a family of glorified gangsters in Florence, Italy. Before they became patrons of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, the Medici family in the 1300s were better known for violence than high finance. But one man, Giovanni de' Medici, decided to make the family legitimate. He mastered a new kind of business, foreign exchange. In an age with hundreds of different coins, someone had to figure out how to trade them, and Giovanni was the best. But the Medici's real genius was how they structured their bank. Unlike earlier banks that were huge, single structures easily toppled by one bad loan to a king, the Medici Bank was a network of smaller, decentralized partnerships. This spread their risk. If one branch failed, the others survived. They became the Pope's bankers, with money flowing in from all over Christendom. This financial innovation, diversification, was the secret that funded the glories of the Renaissance, the money that paid for Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. It came from shrewd banking. And, with wealth, came power. By the mid-1400s, Giovanni's son Cosimo de' Medici was Florence's uncrowned king. Political questions were settled at his house. As one observer noted, he is king in everything but name. The Medicis had transformed from moneylenders, once condemned by the church, to something close to royalty. They'd learned that in finance, small is rarely beautiful. To survive, you needed to be big and diversified. This brings us to a character despised by his society, Shylock, the moneylender from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. His story highlights the massive cultural barrier finance had to overcome. For Christians, lending money at interest, called usury, was a sin condemned by the church. In Dante's Inferno, usurers were placed in the seventh circle of hell. This created an opportunity for Jewish communities, who were forbidden from lending to each other but permitted by their own laws to lend to strangers, meaning Christians. In cities like Venice, they became essential to commerce, providing credit that merchants needed for risky overseas ventures. But they paid a terrible price: social exclusion and vulnerability. Shylock's demand for a pound of flesh wasn't just fiction. It reflected society's deep-seated hostility and mistrust toward financiers, especially minorities. The only escape from the loan shark's world, with its crushing interest rates and implicit violence, was creating a bigger, more stable system, a system where lenders and the powerful were one and the same. That system was the bond market, and as the Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, its father was war. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Italian city-states like Florence and Venice were constantly at war. But they didn't send their own citizens to fight. They hired mercenaries, professional soldiers led by commanders like the Englishman Sir John Hawkwood. And mercenaries cost a fortune. To pay them, cities ran massive deficits. Florence's debt grew into a literal mountain of debt, or Monte Commune. So where did the money come from? From citizens themselves. Wealthier Florentines were forced to lend money to their government. In return, they received interest payments. Here's the crucial innovation: these loans could be bought and sold. A secondary market was born. This was the birth of the government bond. The system worked because the people issuing the bonds, the city's ruling elite, were largely the same people buying them. They had powerful incentive to ensure interest got paid. It was a political system built on a financial foundation. This idea traveled north from Italy, but the bond market truly came of age in the battle between a tiny, rebellious republic and a mighty empire. The Dutch Republic defeated the vast Spanish Empire not because it had bigger armies, but because it had a better financial system. Amsterdam became the world's leading market for government securities. While Spain repeatedly defaulted on its debts, the Dutch built a mountain of debt that investors trusted. Dutch bond yields fell steadily, a sign of immense confidence. This superior financial model crossed the English Channel with the glorious revolution of 1688, when Dutch Prince William of Orange became King of England. It led to creation of the Bank of England and the famous British Consol, a perpetual government bond that became the bedrock of the global financial system for the next century. This financial divergence between Britain and France had profound consequences. While London developed a thriving, trustworthy bond market, Paris struggled. The French monarchy couldn't resolve its financial problems, which ultimately led to the French Revolution. And it was the bond market that would decide the fate of the man who emerged from that revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte. This brings us to one of the most remarkable figures in financial history, Nathan Rothschild. Born in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Nathan arrived in England and quickly rose to become master of the London bond market. His family, with 5 brothers strategically placed in Europe's major capitals, created a financial network faster and more efficient than any government's. The climactic battle between Britain and Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815 wasn't just a contest of armies, it was a contest of financial systems. Britain financed its war by issuing mountains of bonds. Napoleon financed his by plundering conquered lands. Leading up to the battle, Nathan Rothschild's main business was hugely risky, supplying the Duke of Wellington's army with gold coins. He used his family network to smuggle vast sums of gold across Europe, essential for the British war effort. Nathan assumed the war would drag on, so he bought enormous quantities of gold. Then, Napoleon was defeated in a single day. Suddenly, the war was over. Demand for gold plummeted. Nathan was left holding a massive pile of depreciating assets. He faced financial ruin. Here's where the legend of Rothschild at Waterloo gets it wrong. The story goes he learned of victory early, rushed back to London, and made a fortune buying bonds before anyone else knew the news. The truth is more incredible. Facing disaster, Nathan made one of history's most audacious trades. He took all his gold and started buying British government bonds. He was betting everything that peace would cause bond prices, depressed by years of war, to soar. His brothers in Europe begged him to cash out as prices rose, but Nathan held his nerve. He kept buying. Finally, in late 1817, with bond prices up more than 40%, he sold. His profits in today's money would be worth hundreds of millions of pounds. He'd snatched financial victory from military victory's jaws. Contemporaries called him the Bonaparte of finance. The Rothschilds went on to dominate the international bond market for the next half-century, financing governments from Brazil to Russia. They understood something fundamental. In the modern world, power flowed not from land or titles, but from credit. They had a license to kill, financially speaking. Their dominance raises a profound question. Why do debtors ever repay creditors, especially foreign ones? The answer lies in another great 19th-century conflict, the American Civil War. The Confederacy had a huge economic weapon, cotton. Britain's textile mills, the industrial heart of the Victorian economy, depended utterly on Southern cotton. Confederate leaders believed they could force Britain to join their side by imposing a cotton embargo. They also tried financing their war with an ingenious new security, a cotton-backed bond. European investors could buy bonds convertible into cotton at a fixed, pre-war price. As the embargo drove cotton prices through the roof, bond values soared. It seemed brilliant. Even future British Prime Minister William Gladstone bought some. But there was a fatal flaw. For bonds to be valuable, Investors had to believe they could actually get the cotton. That's why the Civil War's real turning point, financially speaking, wasn't a great battle like Gettysburg. It was the Union capture of New Orleans in April 1862. With the South's main port in Union hands, getting cotton out became nearly impossible. Investor confidence collapsed. The Rothschilds, watching from the sidelines, refused to touch Confederate bonds, dismissing them as too speculative. With its bond market exhausted, the Confederacy had only one option: print money. It printed billions of unbacked paper dollars, the graybacks. The result was catastrophic hyperinflation. By war's end, Southern prices had risen over 4,000%. The Confederate economy was collapsing even before its armies surrendered. The South tried defying the bond market, and it ended in ruin. This brings us to the next great innovation in money's ascent, the stock market. If a bond is a share in government debt, a stock is a share in a company's future profits. The joint stock company idea was born from the same impulse driving European expansion, the desire for profit from overseas trade. In 1602, the Dutch created a revolutionary entity, the United East India Company, or VOC. It was a government-sponsored monopoly on all Dutch trade with Asia. But its structure was new. Ownership was divided into multiple shares anyone could buy, from wealthy merchants to humble servants. This was the world's first initial public offering, or IPO. As soon as the company was created, a secondary market sprang up to trade its shares. In Amsterdam, the world's first stock exchange was built, a place where bulls, the optimistic buyers, and bears, the pessimistic sellers, battled daily. The VOC was a staggering success. For over a century, its share price trended upward, paying handsome dividends. It became the foundation of the Dutch global empire. The key was gradual growth tied to real, tangible profits from the spice trade, a story of long-term value. But the stock market also unlocked a darker, more volatile human impulse. No one embodies this more than renegade Scotsman John Law. Law was a convicted murderer, compulsive gambler, and financial genius. After fleeing a death sentence in London, he ended up in Amsterdam, fascinated by the Dutch financial system, but he thought it too conservative. His big idea was combining a monopoly trading company, like the VOC, with a public bank that could issue paper money. His goal? Making gold from paper. He found his chance in France, a kingdom on bankruptcy's brink after Louis XIV's costly wars. In 1716, Law was allowed to set up a bank, the Banque Générale, which could issue paper notes. A year later, he established the Mississippi Company, a monopoly on trade with France's vast but undeveloped Louisiana territory. Law was a marketing master. He painted Louisiana as paradise, a new Garden of Eden. He established a grand new city at the Mississippi's mouth, New Orleans. His plan was converting France's massive national debt into company shares. To make shares attractive, he needed prices to rise. And he had the perfect tool, his own bank. The Banque Royale, as it was now called, began lending money for people to buy Mississippi shares. With this easy credit, share prices soared. From 500 livres, they shot to 5,000, then 10,000. The mood shifted from euphoria to mania. The word millionaire was coined for Paris's newly rich. Law became France's most powerful man, Controller General of Finances. He controlled the country's taxes, debt, mints, overseas trade, and the bank printing the money fueling it all. As he boasted, he would set France higher than ever she was before. But it was a system built on air. Louisiana wasn't paradise, it was a sweltering swamp, where most colonists died within a year. Company profits were imaginary. The only thing driving share prices was ever-increasing paper money supply from Law's bank. Smart investors like Irish banker Richard Cantillon saw the writing on the wall and got out. But for most, the party seemed endless. Then, the bubble burst. As people lost faith and tried converting paper money back into gold and silver, Law resorted to tyranny. He made owning more than a small amount of coin illegal, but he couldn't stop the panic. Share prices collapsed, the bank closed, angry mobs filled the streets. Law fled France, ruined. His system had created the first great stock market bubble and bust, wrecking France's financial system for generations. It set back France's development and left the monarchy's fiscal crisis unresolved, a crisis eventually leading to revolution. John Law's story is a timeless lesson. It shows how combining new technology, in his case paper money, and a monopoly company, easy credit, and human psychology, creates speculative mania that inevitably ends in disaster. So how do we protect ourselves from such disasters, from life's inherent risks? This is where the next step in our ascent comes in: insurance. The idea of pooling resources against misfortune is ancient. But modern insurance, based on mathematics and probability, has unlikely origins with two hard-drinking Presbyterian ministers in 18th century Scotland. Robert Wallace and Alexander Webster worried about what happened to their fellow ministers, widows, and orphans. With help from a brilliant mathematician, they devised a fund plan. Each minister would pay an annual premium. This money would be invested, and returns would pay annuities to widows. Their breakthrough was using actuarial science, statistical calculation of life expectancy, to predict with astonishing accuracy how much money was needed. Their Fund for a Provision for the Widows and Children of the Ministers of the Church of Scotland was the first modern, scientifically managed insurance fund. It eventually grew into today's Scottish Widows. The insurance principle spread, covering everything from fires to shipwrecks to premature death. But no matter how sophisticated private insurance became, some risks were simply too big for the market. Disasters like wars, plagues, and eventually mass unemployment. This led to creation of the ultimate insurance scheme, the welfare state. The idea was pioneered not by socialists, but by conservative German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in the 1880s. He introduced state-run health insurance and old-age pensions to win working-class loyalty and steal his socialist opponents' thunder. This social insurance model spread across the developed world, but Japan took it to the extreme, creating what one politician boasted was a welfare superpower. After World War II's devastation, Japan built a cradle-to-grave system, providing security for all citizens. It seemed miraculous. Japan had the world's longest life expectancy, highly educated population, and one of the most equal societies on Earth, all while its economy boomed. But there was a catch. The welfare state was built on a demographic pyramid that couldn't last. It worked as long as many young workers paid taxes to support few old retirees. But as birth rates fell and life expectancy soared, that pyramid began inverting. Today, Japan has the world's oldest society. Its welfare system faces structural crisis. Its national debt is a staggering 170% of GDP. And this isn't just Japan's problem. The same demographic storm is heading for the United States and Europe. Social Security and Medicare's implicit unfunded liabilities in the U.S. are in the tens of trillions of dollars, far larger than official national debt. The welfare state, once seen as the final victory over risk, faces its own crisis. This led, in the last quarter of the 20th century, to a powerful backlash, a revolution starting in a very unexpected place. In 1973, a military coup in Chile overthrew Salvador Allende's Marxist government. The country was in economic chaos, with hyperinflation running at 900%. The new military dictator, General Pinochet, turned for advice to economists trained at the University of Chicago, disciples of Milton Friedman. These Chicago boys implemented radical free market reforms, but the most revolutionary idea came from a young, Harvard-trained economist named José Piñera. He argued the pay-as-you-go state pension system destroyed the link between effort and reward. His solution was privatizing Social Security. Every worker got the choice to opt out of the state system and instead put 10% of wages into a personal retirement account managed by private companies. It was a huge gamble, but it worked. The reform not only created a new property-owning class, but also gave the Chilean economy a massive boost by dramatically increasing savings rates. Money in those pension funds channeled into Chilean companies, fueling an economic miracle. Chile's success inspired similar reforms across Latin America and worldwide. The revolution against the welfare state also brought forward the oldest, most primal form of financial security, owning your own home. The property-owning democracy idea was born in America from the Great Depression's ashes. Before the 1930s, most Americans were renters. Mortgages were short-term and hard to get. The Depression devastated the housing market, with thousands of daily foreclosures. Roosevelt's New Deal responded by reinventing the mortgage market. New government agencies like the Federal Housing Administration and Fannie Mae were created to insure and buy mortgages, making it possible for lenders to offer long-term, low-interest loans. It was revolutionary. The government now effectively underwrote the homeownership dream. After World War II, U.S. homeownership rates soared, but there was a dark side. This new property-owning democracy was, for a long time, for whites only. Government maps explicitly redlined predominantly black neighborhoods, marking them uncreditworthy. This systematic discrimination was a hidden financial dimension of the civil rights struggle. As that struggle was won, pressure grew to extend homeownership's dream to everyone. And in the 1980s, a new financial innovation seemed to promise just that. It was called securitization. The idea was pioneered by traders at Salomon Brothers. They bought thousands of individual mortgages, bundled them together, then sliced the combined interest payments into new securities, bonds backed by mortgages. This turned an illiquid local asset, a mortgage, into a liquid global one, a bond. This financial alchemy transformed Wall Street, but it also broke the personal link between lender and borrower. The person you paid your mortgage to might now be an anonymous investor on the other side of the world who had no idea who you were. This system reached its peak and breaking point with the rise of subprime lending in the 2000s. These were mortgages aimed at borrowers with poor credit histories. They often came with deceptively low introductory, teaser rates, which would then jump to much higher levels after a couple of years. Subprime lending was promoted by politicians as making the American dream a reality for millions of minority families. Lenders had a different motive. They didn't care if borrowers could actually afford loans, because they weren't keeping them. They sold them to Wall Street banks, pocketing fat commissions. Banks, in turn, used securitization to bundle these risky loans into complex instruments called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs. With rating agency blessings, these junk-rated loans were magically transformed into AAA-rated securities, then sold to investors worldwide, from German regional banks to Norwegian town councils. The risk was spread so thinly across the globe it seemed to have vanished. But it hadn't. It was just hidden. And the whole system was fueled by a vast river of cheap money flowing from the other side of the world. This brings us to the most important economic relationship of our time, a relationship Ferguson calls chimerica. For the past couple decades, the world economy has been driven by strange symbiosis between China and America. The Chinese, a nation of savers, have been producing cheap goods and lending the proceeds to Americans, a nation of spenders. China ran a massive trade surplus, and to keep its currency cheap and exports competitive, it had to buy trillions of U.S. dollars, which it invested in U.S. Treasury bonds. This flood of Chinese savings kept U.S. interest rates artificially low. It was this Asian savings glut that fueled the housing bubble. It was cheap money from chimerica sloshing around the U.S. mortgage market, allowing lenders to give 100% mortgages to people with no income, no job, and no assets. It was a marriage made in heaven, until it wasn't. In 2007, as U.S. interest rates began rising, teaser rates on millions of subprime mortgages expired. Homeowners in places like Detroit and Memphis suddenly faced huge increases in monthly payments. Defaults and foreclosures skyrocketed. The subprime butterfly had flapped its wings. The hurricane was about to begin. As defaults mounted, those complex CDOs' value collapsed. Risk that was supposed to have been spread around the world suddenly reappeared, concentrated on the world's biggest banks' balance sheets. No one knew who held bad debt or how much it was really worth. Trust, the entire financial system's bedrock, evaporated. Credit markets seized up. The result was the largest financial shock since the Great Depression. It led to major investment banks like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers collapsing, British bank nationalization, and a global credit crunch that pushed the world economy into severe recession. Chimerica, the engine of global growth, turned out to be a chimera, a mythical beast at war with itself. The crisis revealed deep instability at the global financial system's heart. And so money's ascent continues. It's an evolutionary story, full of innovation, competition, and extinction. New financial species, like hedge funds and sovereign wealth funds, constantly emerge. Old ones face collapse. The system is inherently unstable because it's a mirror of us. It reflects our cognitive biases, our tendency to swing from greed to fear, our perpetual failure to learn from the past. The financial system, Ferguson argues, is like humanity's mirror. It reflects our blemishes as clearly as our beauty. Financial history's great lesson is that without understanding its erratic, evolutionary ascent, we're doomed to be surprised by its sudden, terrifying descents. So what do we take away from this incredible, sweeping history of money? It's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. 4,000 years of finance, from clay tablets to collateralized debt obligations. But I believe Niall Ferguson's core message is both powerful and deeply personal. The first, and perhaps most important lesson, is that finance isn't a monster needing to be caged, as some politicians might say. It's the engine of human progress. Credit and debt's evolution, Ferguson shows us, was as important as any technological innovation in our journey from subsistence farming to the material prosperity many of us enjoy today. Without banks, there would have been no Renaissance. Without a bond market, governments couldn't have financed infrastructure that built modern nations. Without a stock market, grand projects transforming our world would never have left the drawing board. Poverty, he argues, isn't caused by banks' presence, but their absence. It's lack of access to efficient credit networks that traps people with loan sharks and prevents them from building better futures. But, and this is the crucial second lesson, this ascent is never a smooth, straight line. It's a roller coaster. The financial system is inherently unstable because it reflects human nature. We're hardwired, it seems, for booms and busts. We're prone to what Alan Greenspan famously called irrational exuberance, and equally prone to sudden flips into fear and panic. Ferguson's history powerfully reminds us, we never seem to learn. The Mississippi Bubble in 1720, the Wall Street crash of 1929, the dot-com bust of 2000, and the subprime crisis of 2008. They all follow the same five-stage pattern of speculative bubble, fueled by easy credit and ending in painful crash. Details change, but human psychology remains the same. This leads to the third lesson, about risk and security's nature. We all crave security. We want to believe our future is predictable, our savings safe, our homes a one-way bet. But as this book shows, that's an illusion. The future isn't a single predictable path. It's a realm of radical uncertainty. The Nobel Prize-winning economists at Long-Term Capital Management thought they'd built a black box eliminating risk. Their models told them the losses they suffered in 1998 were so improbable they should never have happened in the universe's lifetime. Their mistake? They knew lots of math, but not enough history. They'd forgotten that in the real world, black swans, unforeseeable, catastrophic events happen. So what can we do? How can we apply these grand historical lessons to our own lives? First, diversify. Money's story is a story of different asset classes rising and falling. Don't bet the house on the house. Don't put all faith in stocks or bonds or gold. The wisest path is spreading investments, building a portfolio that can weather storms that will inevitably come. Second, understand debt's power and peril. Credit is the magic making modern economies work. It lets us invest in education, start a business, or buy a home. But its close cousin, leverage, is a double-edged sword. It magnifies gains, but also magnifies losses. Financial history is littered with ruins of those who borrowed too much, from the Duke of Buckingham to the subprime homeowner. And finally, be humble. Be humble facing uncertainty. The most brilliant minds can be spectacularly wrong. The most powerful institutions can be brought to their knees overnight. The best insurance we have is awareness of our own fallibility and deep respect for the past's lessons. Reading a book like The Ascent of Money isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's an act of self-preservation. That was a summary of The Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson. We've journeyed through the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a great mountain range. It can show you the peaks and valleys, but it can never replace actually climbing the mountain yourself. The real magic happens when you read the book. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see the world, your money, and your own future. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It tells us we're on the right path and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. We have so much more to discover, and I believe the best way to do it is together. Let's keep growing.